So we're going to do 2 different interviews, and we'll split the session in half. And then I'm going to be asking the questions, and Jeroen is going to yell at me if I suck, and he's going to ask better questions. And the point of all this is that we want to try to get really interesting stuff really, really fast. So there isn't any fat, it's all meat, okay? And then we'll be interviewing two developers. You guys are doing 2 different things. The first thing I want to talk about, are we ready, Dan? Okay, give me the thumbs up. So let's do quick intros. My name's Arseny. My studio makes hyper-casual games or simple casual games. I'm a big gamer. I know these guys. And then Jeroen the hype man.
I'm Jeroen. I work for a company called GetSocial. We build social technology that helps game developers improve retention, engagement, and monetization.
Okay, cool. And the topic I want to talk about is like, how do you pick the games that you're working on? So then maybe start with Luai and tell us about yourself.
So hi everyone, I'm Mahjneh. I'm the CEO of Quantum Shake. We're a mobile gaming company based in Helsinki, Finland. We have been creating games since 2014. The biggest thing that makes our team great, we're 8 guys, is the data. So we're very data oriented. So your question was.
So like, what are you working on now? The game that you want to talk about, tell us.
Yeah, so right now we're creating a game called Arena Brawls. It's a tactical turn-based game. It's basically auto chess meets League of Legends. So why are we creating that game? Again, I mentioned that data is everything to us. We're former data scientists. So even before starting the actual game design, what we do is we do a lot of CPI tests, data analysis. We're benchmarking all sort of stuff. We're using tons of different tools to collect as much data as possible. And basically the big question that we want to answer is, where do we have the possibility to be one of the top 5 top performing games in a specific niche genre?
Okay, so it's a strategy, 3-on-3 strategy, 3-on-3 brawler, you said.
It's a tactical turn-based.
Sorry, tactical, yeah, yes. Yeah. So, and what does it look like?
It's currently in alpha stage. The metrics are looking.
I mean the art. What does the art look like? Is it like hardcore pixel art?
It's semi-hardcore, yeah.
Okay, I don't know. I don't get semi-hardcore. I only get hard or not hard.
You can check it out. Check it out. Arena Brawls.
We can do this stuff. Okay. Yeah. So no, okay, but what I'm trying to get at is why did you pick that game? Why didn't you make a match 3 game?
Like
you don't have the metrics ahead of time, so you have to make a choice. We're going to make this game. How did
yeah, of course. So data is the first thing. We saw that in this specific genre we had the best opportunity to, make the big bucks. But of course, it also needs the input of the whole team. We have to be interested in the game. We have to be passionate about the game, because otherwise, we're 8 guys. We'll be only working on, something that data-wise looks promising, but nobody actually likes playing inside of the company.
So you're looking at the intersection of where you think you have a spot in the market and what you can get excited about.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So, all right, so
market first, and then us second.
So let's jump to Romain. Same question. Who are you? What are you guys working on?
I'm Romain. I'm from JANEIOUS. It's a company which is a customer-centric mobile game developer, and we're working on.
What does that mean?
This actually means that we are obsessed by customers, and we have been created by them. So my history is I was actually a mobile gaming whale. I was #1 in several games. I built huge communities around myself.
What was the game? Was it Game of
War? First one I played Game of War, but they lost me due to not telling me that I needed to spend 5,000 euros to make it fun, so I spent 4,000 and quit. But true story.
Where were you the whale?
First in Galaxy Legend, currently Marvel Strike Force, and many other games as well. Back there, I built a big community, and the people wanted more than the game could offer them. And that's where we realized that there is a real niche in the market for games which are made without Chinese walls and developers that work together with their future players. So we got the future players to brainstorm in chat messenger groups. Then we got those players to fundraise and give us money. We raised about $2 million this way. And then we built a company to create, to make their dreams reality.
So what's the dream that came reality?
It's currently the game Fusion Gods, which is in early access. Google featured it 2 weeks ago there.
What kind of game is it?
It's a, call it, auto turn-based multiplayer role-playing game. So think of games like Marvel Strike Force on autoplay, basically, with a grid. So you position units on a grid, look at the enemy formation, push go, and then they play based on a certain algorithm. And you can upgrade, exchange, you have robots, pilots, equipment, play around with that, a lot of strategy, special attacks, and very, very deep interaction between players.
And all that came out of your player research, your investigations of what your potential players wanted.
Yeah, it came from years playing with other players, seeing what they want, what they're missing. It was in this case, it was a community without a home. So we decided to create a home for that community and try to get as many other players engaged into that as possible so that the game can be as big as possible.
Interesting, cool. So this is kind of like you found the audience first, saw the demand, and then kind of built around that.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
There have to be many, I mean, there are many different audiences, right? So why did you settle on this one?
Because this one was the closest one to us. So the idea was if you want to build a customer-centric business, you start with the low-hanging fruits, and then you build a reputation and expand to other audiences. I wouldn't do it any other way.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, so maybe both you guys, what are like the 3 factors that you use to evaluate what you're going to develop?
Okay, because in my case, it's rather straightforward. So the most important thing for me is, do I have a customer group that can be incredibly passionate about what we are doing? Without that, I'm not starting anything. Having identified those, we then go, okay, is that customer group actually able to carry a project? So either they don't necessarily have to fund it like we do with the first audience, but in the end, once we get them what they want, that thing has to earn money and be sustainable. And the third one is, will that further the reputation of our company? So is this something that if we do it, will bring us positive press, increase our reputation, and allow us to tackle more communities and make amazing games for amazing players, basically.
Cool. So you're looking at audience, their disposable income, effectively.
Their willingness to spend.
Yeah, the audience willingness to spend, and what it does for your company, or the credibility it builds for.
Yeah, and marketing potential, basically. Yeah. These are the 3 ones that I would look at.
Did you come up with an answer?
Yeah, well, it always goes around the data. So data is always the number one, and it consists of many things. The second one is actually the same pretty much as you guys. So we're also customer-oriented, but again, it's part with the data thing. And third one, I'd go with the team. The team, everything that revolves around it, how we work together, how enthusiastic we are about the projects.
Got it, okay.
Data and passion, basically.
Data and passion, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, so I have 2 more questions. So let's say that we've established these bullet points of traits for developing. How do you measure after the game is out? How do you measure that you've kind of hit those, those 3 targets?
We actually use like an in-house built funnel model. So again, to measure stuff, we're data-oriented. We want to measure as early as possible. We don't want to be one of those developers who start creating a game, and then they create it for 1 year, and then they do a soft launch, and they see that, okay, it didn't work out. We want to test things out even before the actual game design. We want to test 2 weeks after the actual game design has started, and we have so many different stages in our funnel model where we check if the game at the current stage is in meeting with the KPIs that are set to it. And if it's not, then we need to do something. Usually it is killing the game. So we just kill the game and we move on to something else.
So the third one is interesting because it's about the team passion. So it's like you're working on, like, you know, back in my day, we worked on the Simpsons EA game.
Yeah.
And like, we worked on that game for a year, but the team at EA that was building that game was working on it for 5 years. I don't know, I mean, I guess they all got paid a lot because that team never quit. How do you measure, is your team still passionate about the game after it's out?
After it's out? That's actually a really good question, because out of all the games that we have created, only one game has passed the funnel model. So only one game is what we call a diamond, a game that generates revenue. Actually, when we released the game through a publisher, the interest of the team just died.
Interesting.
Because I think maybe dying is a wrong word. I think it's more of shifting. So the game was ready, we gave it to the publisher, they published it, and we already were designing and starting a new project. And of course, every single time you start something new, people get excited. And that's the thing. Sometimes we notice that, for example, a game designer is designing new stuff all the time, and he gets excited about the new stuff. But sometimes it feels hard to keep him working on the existing stuff.
Cool. So, Rowan, what about you guys? How do you measure that once the game is out, you know, that kind of, those factors are still part of the process?
Well, in our case, I guess we are the developer that works not only 1 year, but 3 years on the game before getting any metrics or KPIs, because our KPIs and metrics are different. So they were about the engagement of the community beforehand, the willingness to fund it, etc. So once we had that, our risk was in a way hedged, because we knew that the money, it was already making money, but just in a different way. And as soon as we reached early access, which is our current stage, we started to move towards data. So we looked at the metrics and we checked whether our hypothesis is right. And what we see is actually validating our approach. So we see very, very good metrics that beat our expectations, and we know exactly what we have to do now to actually improve them further. And once we iterate a few times, we should be actually at a good space to push the game forward.
Got it. Okay, so last?
Yeah, so what I'm curious about is that obviously there's the perception of your community of what the game will be, and then there's the reality of what it's turned out, and now you continue to iterate. So how do you sync customer expectation with the reality of the rest of your development process, your live ops, basically?
The trick is to remove Chinese walls and to have an open communication. And for that, there's two things. First of all, you have to be willing to communicate with them actively and not think of them as a nuisance that you have to just reply to, but rather take it to your heart and think of it as at least your friends trying to give you helpful input. And then you have to communicate back in a way that they understand what you're doing. Because often it fails not because somebody is not listening to the customers, but because they cannot communicate what they're trying to do with that. And this is what we're very good at. So they understand our concerns, limitations, or what we have to do based on the market. At the same time, as long as they know that they're being heard, that's great. And we had an example of, we had initially interface problems. So we saw that the interface is not working out. It's not as fun as it could be. And one of the fans wrote like 2 A4 pages of feedback on on what it could be. And it triggered a process in our company, and within the 2 months, I think we completely redesigned the entire interface, and what came out was amazing. And immediately, we're not touching it ever since. So we had very few iterations on the interface because of that. And thanks to the community, thanks to us being open, and thanks to the team taking the input and using that to funnel their creativity and their work, and suddenly they came up with something great because of that. And that community appreciated that.
All right, so in my experiment with trying to do these rapid fire question and answer, I want to talk about Crunch.
Okay.
Yeah, but first tell us who you are. Yeah, no, I like Captain Crunch, delicious.
All right,
But,
so
who are you?
quick me, I've been making games for about 26 years. The last 15 of them, I've been running a game studio called Boomzap. We're a Southeast Asian independent game developer, does premium casual games, blah, blah, blah. But before that, in respect to the Crunch conversations, I used to do AAA development as well. And I was the producer for Far Cry, the first one,
Yes.
Working at Crytek in Germany, where we can talk about that Crunch if you'd like.
Well, so what is Crunch? Do you have a scientific answer for that question?
I don't think there is one. And I think one of the things I would say about Crunch, that there's been all this stuff in the media and the news and such about it, and I've read through a lot of it. And honestly, I know I'll get slammed for this, but I think a lot of people who are saying like, oh, I've been on Crunch for so long, blah, 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 I don't really buy into a lot of it. I think a lot of people have really crappy work habits.
Yeah.
And that becomes Crunch. And I was in the office all day. And you're like, well, what did you do during that time in the office? So I don't know. I've heard a lot of people talk about how bad their Crunch is, but I think in general, I think if you're there until dinner, yeah, you're crunching. I think if we wanted like some scientific reason, if you were there in the morning and you're still there at dinner and you're doing that more than a day or two a week, yeah, you're probably crunching.
So just so we're on the same page, this is about kind of working more hours than is expected.
Yeah, I mean, that's the theory. I mean, you hear these stories of people, and, I read some article recently, it was in Kotaku or somewhere, and somebody was like, we were on 100 hours a week crunch for, 2 months. And I did the math in my head, and I'm like, no, you aren't. Like 100 hours a week. I mean, if you just do the math, there's something very, very wrong if you were actually in a studio that long. But you hear these tales, and I think there's a lot of levels to it. And one of the levels, I think, is people like to tell war stories. Yes. People want to be like, oh, you had 90 hours a week, we had 100 hours a week. And you hear it kind of goes up on each other. And I guess there's some people that are working those hours, but I haven't seen it that much.
I mean, that's why I want to talk about this. It seems like every month there's another, from, what was it, the Rockstar?
Yeah.
Anthem was like, Anthem was made all on Crunch in 8 years, or whatever it was.
And I'm sure there are real stories. I'm sure there are real people that did that. But a lot of times when you hear that story, it's some reporter who's been reporting in games for, 2 or 3 years. He goes and talks to a couple disgruntled employees. They don't really back check it. And now it's a rage in the industry. And this is not new. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but 10 years ago, there was that big thing. Remember the EA Wives thing? And it's real. Crunch is real. There are people, I lived it. And, when I was working at Crytek, we did like 9 months of pretty brutal crunch. And it was real. We were all there. It was bad. It certainly happens.
So let's talk about
what makes it happen. What's the reason it happens?
Let's talk about why and then how to fix.
Well, the funny bit is, and this, again, 20 years of game development, I've been hearing about crunch and people talking about crunch, and the answer is always the same old bull. Oh, if we just planned better. If we just sat down and made a big waterfall diagram or whatever, if we planned better, it's always the fault of the management, and the management didn't plan properly. And if that's true, if that's genuinely true, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, you think somebody would have tried planning better. What I think actually, when I look at it, what I see is there's actually a problem in the way that games are financed. If you look at how most games are made with publishers or made internally, right? Somebody presents some sort of white paper of what they're going to make, maybe a little prototype of what they're going to make, and then they say, okay, we need to get this financed. And they go to somebody who says, yeah, we'll make that game. That sounds like a great game. How much money do you need to make that? And now, when you're still at that very first stage and you don't know shit about how long it's going to take to make this game or what's going to be in it, you haven't built any of the levels, you haven't done any of the real work, it would be physically impossible for you to really plan because you wouldn't know how to plan because you're still in that prototyping stage. You've got to sign up for a budget. And that budget's going to define how long you have, right? I mean, or how many people you have, which is somewhat related. It's not the same, but it's highly related.
So then the team estimates this gigantic project.
Yeah. And then, 6 months later, you find out, oh, goodness, it seems when we did our 2-week white paper on the project, we didn't understand all the details of the project. But you go back to the publisher and you say, well, we're going to need more time or money, which is obviously the same thing. And they say, no. And now you have crunch. And so I don't think,
But then this discussion, obviously, the publisher has more of these discussions than the developer, right? Because this will happen to the publisher more often than it happens to the developer, because the developer is working on one game, the publisher might be publishing 10. So
Yeah.
we might be having this discussion 10 times over.
Yeah.
So is it their responsibility to inject some healthy cynicism or skepticism into an enthusiastic developer's ideas on when they'll actually deliver the game?
I would say yes to that, but I would also say that there should probably be a rethinking of the way we finance projects where, okay, I'll finance you up to the end of prototype. And then let's have another discussion about how much this is actually going to cost, because at that point you might actually know. But come on, I've written, in my time in games, I've probably written 200 game proposals. I have no idea how long those were going to take to make it. It's 2 weeks of you sitting around with some documents and an idea of what you're going to make, but you haven't actually built any of it. You can't know.
Yes.
And it's really frustrating for me when the constant solution that you hear is some game journalist, well, if the executives had planned this better. They're not magical, they don't have some sort of magic spell where they know how long it was going to take this game that was still in the designer's head. That's not
I mean, I'm always, I agree with you. And it's like, what are the knowns? How much money I have and when we have to release this for it to make at least that money back,
Yeah.
right?
No, there's another side to it, which is you could have that same discussion after prototype, not about we need more money or we need more time. You could have that discussion about, hey, let's cut a bunch of stuff. We looked into it and you wanted this game that had all of this in it. Let's not do this bit, because if you do this bit, we're not going to make it in time or within your budget. And that discussion almost never happens. And it's very interesting, especially in the world of casual games, as we've seen, you can actually make a pretty small MVP and put it in front of users and start looking at what features are actually going to be useful, which features people actually want, which ones are actually going to monetize. We don't do enough of that early on in the process. I've seen projects go into, was it Red Dead Redemption or whatever, there were the horse's testicles got bigger or smaller based on the temperature. You know what, that made me, it looked cool in a review, but that was time, and they crunched. They crunched hard to make bigger horse testicles. Maybe someone in that process should have been like, if the horse's testicles were the same size, we'd probably still be okay.
We could be home for dinner.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable choice to me.
Is that a mental holdover from the disk-based model where if it wasn't on the disk, you're screwed, right?
Partially, yeah, I do think it is. But we live in a very different world now. And we live in a world where players who play games expect the game to change over time. They expect there to be new content. They expect there to be changes. And so let's give them a smaller game up front, one that we can plan a little bit better. Let's have those discussions earlier on in the process with our publishers and with our teams about, hey, look, you're promising this great, big, huge thing. Now that we're at the end of prototyping, maybe it would be a good time to reassess, are you actually going to do that or not? But instead, what we do is we get to the end of prototype and we go, oh, shit, we're going to have to crunch. And that's where it really comes from.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this kind of ties into what Romain was saying and how JANEIOUS works with their community. So maybe you don't launch 100% of your vision. As long as you have a dot on the horizon to work towards.
There are great projects that work under this model. How long was Factorio in early access? I forget, like a year, 2 years, something ridiculous. How long was Stardew Valley in early access?
Yeah.
There are all kinds of games like this where people said, look,
Citizen?
That's a scam.
A different question. But no, there are good games that sold well, that get good reviews, that people love on Steam right now, that have been in early access for like a year, where they said, look, we can't do this by this date. But you know what? We're going to keep working on it. That's going to be something we release later. Here's what we're trying to do. And audiences that are consistently talked to, they can handle that, right? And those kind of solutions stop you from that thing of, well, we have to have it all by this date. It all has to be done. We made all these promises, and if we don't, we're going to kill by the critics. So guess what? Nobody gets a weekend for the next 6 months.
So I think I had two questions, and we're going to have to wrap up. So can you outsource crunch? Can you plan to outsource crunch?
There is the old saying in the game industry that 9 women and 1 month don't make a baby. You can and you can't. Some things have to be done in parallel. Some things can be done in serial. Swip that. Some things can be done in parallel. Some things have to be done in serial. You can't always just take this big bunch of work and say, oh, we have all this work, so if we have a whole bunch of Chinese outsourced partners, we can throw it all there and make it all magically happen.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
That doesn't always work. But again, there are different phases in the process. Now, you might get to a phase in the process where you're like, okay, we kind of understand how this all works. We just need 10 more of these kind of units. We kind of know what they look like. Yeah, you can outsource some of that. So the answer is a kinda.
Okay. And I think the other one is if you are in a crunch where there's a critical path issue that needs to be fixed by crunch, what do you do with the employees that are waiting for that piece?
They get to have dinner.
Yeah, pretty much.
But they're going to come in, they're going to have a normal day, but they can't, I mean, which is already bad.
This is one of the things I really see is one of the big mistakes that we make in the industry is we judge people by the hours that they're in the studio. And actually, my studio, we don't actually have an office. We're totally virtual. Everybody lives and works at home. So I actually have no idea how many hours my staff works, right? Now, what I know is I've been working in games long enough to know what about 40 hours worth of work looks like. So I assign that to everybody at the beginning of the week. And if you finish it, you finish it. If you don't finish it, then guess what? You're working the weekend because you didn't finish. That model works great. And one of the reasons it works great is because they don't see each other. So the guy who is struggling to, get the work done in time doesn't see the guy who finished his work on Wednesday and he's been playing World of Warcraft for the last 2 days of the week, which is the way it should be, right? Because we have this kind of perverse thing in games where, let's assume that 2 of you are working for me in a game studio, and one of you, you get your work done on time, consistently, high level of quality.
Sounds
You're
like me.
consistently late,
Yeah.
right? You're consistently late. Same
On
amount
the
of work,
money.
right?
Usually true.
So what do I do as a manager? Well, I still need to get the work done, so I take some work off of you and I put it on you, right? And I even it out. And so your reward for being good at your job is to get more work for less money. And your reward for sucking at your job is to get less work for more money, which is totally perverse, right? And if this goes on long enough, sooner or later, you're going to get pissed off because you're looking at him and you're like, why am I doing more work than him? I'm getting paid the same amount of money, blah, right? In the model that we use, because I have no idea how much you're working, I just know whether or not you finished. When you don't finish your work, I get mad at you and say, finish your damn work. And you get to play World of Warcraft on Friday. And so your reward for finishing early is finishing early. The success is its own reward. In a brick and mortar studio where everyone's staring at each other, it's harder to do that because you would be watching him play World of Warcraft and you'd be like, that guy's a slacker. And I think we have to get out of this mentality.
Okay, and we'll end with that. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so guys, thanks for staying till the end. We're off. Thank you. Thank you.